Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee special meeting for June 16th, 2021. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 10:01 a.m. As is standard with the meetings in this virtual world, I'd like to do an AV check with councillors and key people in attendance. So let's start with Councillor Daigle-Gammon, District 1. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and welcome from District 1, Waverly Fall River Muscatawbit Valley. So happy to be here today for Audit and Finance. My colleagues, hello. The staff, hello. And anybody else that's there, welcome.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hensby, District 2.
Sounds like Councillor Daigle-Gammon is the brightest sunshine that we have on this foggy day. Welcome
right.
from District 2 in Preston, Chesapeake, Eastern Shore. Ready to get back down to business.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Purdy, District 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm here from District 4, Cole Harbour, Westfall, Lake Loon, Cherrybrook, and I still have my ducks here before I change my picture. Just another meeting with my ducks because they're just so cute.
That's right. Thank you. Councillor Cleary, District 9.
Hello, everyone. I'm actually thinking we should all get those green shades with some armbands so we can look a little bit more financial as we have these meetings. But here and ready to
go. The visors, that would be certainly telling. Councillor Morse, District 10. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Maybe we can switch to pinstripes as well with our visors.
There we go.
Looking forward to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Savage.
Good morning, guys. All set.
Good stuff. Thank you. And our Auditor General, Evangeline Coleman-Sad. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'd like to move ahead with the agenda, and we have the approval of the minutes of May 19th, 2021. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. And a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes of May 19th, 2021? Seeing none, all in favor of the minutes of May 19th, 2021, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Beautiful. Thank you very much. That passes. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to the clerk. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received no requests for additions or deletions for this meeting, but I understand that there may be an interest in moving around some of the agenda items.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, I believe you had mentioned maybe that the mayor wanted to speak to that item, or?
That is not in my notes, but Mayor
No.
Savage.
No, I just had texted you this morning saying if nobody else had their name on Neptune, I'd put it forward, but
Right.
I wouldn't propose that we hold up the AG if she's up first.
Okay. Thank you. So there are no amendments to the order of business. Can I have someone move the order of business? The order of business
moved.
as
So
presented.
moved.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Savage. All in favor of the order of business as presented.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? Beautiful. We have an agenda. Next item is business arising out of the minutes. I don't believe there is any. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Seeing none. Motions of reconsideration is none. Motions of rescission is none. Consideration of deferred business is none. Notices of tabled matters is none. Correspondence. Over to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is no correspondence received for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Are there any petitions?
And
Nope.
the clerk's office received no notice of petitions either. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And there are no presentations, no information items brought forward. And so the next item on the agenda is the item 12.1.1, the follow-up review from the 2019 audits. Over to the Auditor General, Evangeline, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. I am going to share my screen so that you can see my presentation. There. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here this morning to talk to you about our follow-up results from 3 audits that my office released in 2019. And those were audits of payroll management, the purchasing card program, and road and sidewalk asset management. These audits had 27 recommendations across 3 reports. 63% of those recommendations have been completed. There are 10 recommendations outstanding from payroll management and from the road and sidewalk asset management audits. The purchasing card audit, all the recommendations related to that are completed. The percentage complete is down overall from prior follow-ups that my office has done. Management told us that COVID-19 contributed to challenges in getting recommendations completed over the past year. We will follow up these outstanding recommendations in a year, and we will monitor that work as well as future follow-ups to determine if this slippage in recommendations completed is a trend or is an isolated event. I'll start with payroll management. Payroll management has implemented some of the recs that relate to monitoring salary change errors and certain unauthorized changes, proper timesheet approvals. They've put in place better documentation of the approvals that are required to change payroll data. And they've also limited access to payroll backup files to those who require it. The outstanding areas or recommendations pretty much all relate to monitoring. So there's a need for monitoring for errors in payroll data changes. So some of those areas are looked after and others remain outstanding. Payroll staff time records. So there were some staff that could modify their own records. There's a need to monitor for any changes in those instances where it might not be possible to limit those staff's access to their own records just because of the jobs that they have. There's a need to do timesheet checks before pay is deposited and to monitor for unauthorized changes to employee banking information. These are all important areas that management needs to make sure they're monitoring. And I wanted to highlight a particular process on payroll management. There was a process established to monitor for errors in employee data changes in payroll. It was stopped during COVID. The documentation for it is all electronic, so it's not clear why not being in the office would have prevented continuing with that control. And I just wanted to reiterate this morning that controls are important all of the time. If you have a key control, it's important that it always be carried out, and that if there's some reason why it can't be, that something be done to mitigate it. In times of significant change, like everybody working from home during COVID and all of the challenges that brought for all of us, can mean that controls are even more important. People are stressed, they're distracted, and those are the times when it's, sometimes mistakes can be more easily made. So controls can be even more important in those times of change. Purchasing card program, I don't have a whole lot to say about. All of the recommendations were completed. These areas cover things such as updating the policy and supporting procedures, tracking compliance better, and dealing with non-compliance. So that's a great job on that, 100% completion rate. Road and sidewalk asset management audit has 4 recommendations complete and 6 that are outstanding of the 10 recommendations that were made. There is a 5-year capital plan now, which is progress, but they still don't know if funding will be sufficient to complete all of those projects. There's also a need to establish goals that are consistent with regional council priorities, and that relates to deciding what condition the road and asset network needs to be maintained in, what's sort of that minimum standard that HRM wants. We did find that the business unit updated their annual capital processes, and that's a good step. There is still a need to ensure that there's value for money in how projects are selected, and that could mean that projects are not spread as evenly across districts. The need may be greater in some areas. And finally, there's a need to develop performance measures to set targets and then to measure the achievement of those targets or progress towards them. Our upcoming follow-up work, the next three that we will take a look at in the coming year are the LED streetlight conversion project, HRM's new website project, and fleet vehicle use, car allowances, and mileage audits. So those are all previous audits that we will follow up. And finally, I want to say thanks to HRM staff for their cooperation as we completed our follow-up work. And of course, thanks to the staff in my office that carried out the work. And finally, I'd like to highlight something this morning. Many of you likely know David Murr, audit manager in my office, and I wanted to let you know that Dave is retiring after 33 years with HRM. So he's a very long time HRM employee. Technically, his last day is the end of July, but Dave has some vacation, and so he'll be retiring kind of early to mid-July. We will miss Dave tremendously in the office. We'll miss his sense of humor, his sarcasm, and his departure leaves a huge hole for us. He's got so much history with the organization. He always knows just who to contact and who to call when we have a challenge or when we need to get information, and we will truly miss that as well. So we wish Dave all the best in his retirement. And now I would be happy to take any questions that you might have, and I will stop sharing my screen as well.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations to David on a very long and wholesome career with HRM. Please indicate if you would like to ask any questions in the chat. I see Councillor Hensby has raised his hand. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. First of all, congratulations to Dave in regards to his retirement. Yes, his sarcasm will be missed, that's for sure. But good luck with your future endeavors. Couple of things in regards to the asset management of the sidewalks and stuff. Understand that we've been taking on a new procedure. We used to have a street index for how bad the asphalt is deteriorated, but I think they're switching over to a new methodology for measurements and stuff. And I want to know, how did that change of methodology affect the audit in regards to the asset management? And my other question is for your future one in regards to the LED streetlight conversion. I'm hoping that you'll be checking with the inventory of those lights that what I call the gray lights, the ghost lights that have not been reconciled with Nova Scotia Power, who owns them and stuff, because there's a lot of street lights out there that are probably out there without a power bill associated with them. And I think they were put up a lot by the municipality during the days we had area rates and stuff, and they're on other municipal properties or shining over public areas or on private lanes in which we had the area rate for. But now these are in limbo, and so those have not been converted yet. So there are a lot of still old lights out there that have not been accepted by HRM yet. So hopefully your audit will review those, I guess you could say, questionable lights that have not been assumed yet. Okay.
Okay, thank you for those questions. So on the asset management one, yes, there was a new pavement management system, is my understanding. It wasn't fully operational at the time of our audit. If you have sort of further questions on exactly what the status of that is today, you'd have to check that with TPW management. There was a recommendation related to that deals with, there were some consultant reports on paving practices and surface condition and so on. And there was a recommendation related to developing detailed plans with deadlines to implement those remaining recommendations. That is one of the ones that remains outstanding. So that's the status of that. And on the LED, this won't be a new audit. It will be a follow-up, and so it'll be a review level, and it will look at whatever the recommendations from that LED report were. I'm going to be very honest to tell you, I can't remember what those are off the top of my head, but whatever the individual recommendations were in that report is what we will be following up. There wouldn't be any new work that we would be undertaking as part of that.
Okay. One supplementary question in regards to the subdivision streets. How I read that is that you want more of a check and balances on the contractors installing those. We should have more inspections at the front end. Is that how I read that report recommendation? Is that we want to make sure that our subdivision streets are built to our municipal public standards and not anything less?
So that's also one of the outstanding recommendations. And I'm just going to refer back to my original report here. So the issues there were that we felt planning and development needed to do a better job of monitoring the construction of the roads and sidewalks of new subdivisions prior to taking things over from developers. So some of the issues we had was a lack of documentation being maintained. Sometimes it was in individuals' files versus in a central file. And we did look at the process to accept municipal services for 10 subdivisions. Some of the issues that we identified were limited evidence that staff performed site visits for those 10 subdivision projects. No support to confirm whether deficiencies were identified and addressed. There was no material testing results in one instance, and some instances where some of the approved design drawings that we would have needed to verify whether testing was acceptable were missing. So that recommendation was still outstanding. I don't know to what extent some of those areas may or may not have been addressed when recommendations are still outstanding. We don't do very much work on follow-up to confirm that. I mean, if management says they're not finished, we pretty much run with that and assume that they're not done.
Yeah, I agree with in regards to especially the design specs of roads. These are long-term capital assets, and sometimes they may need to go back 15, 20 years to rebuild the road or reconstruct the road. And it'd be good to have those initial reports or the initial studies. And sometimes those are, I don't know, were archived or whatever kept may be. Hopefully they don't get purged with files after a period of time, but those documents are necessary for future planning of these old roads. Thank you.
And we will follow up that recommendation again in a year. As I said, anything that was outstanding, we will follow up again.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Morse. And you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Evangeline, for the report. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more on the section on roads and sidewalks about how this could be better connected to council's goals and support council's goals, and how we might be missing out on value for money, and how we might provide better measurable performance targets in that area. Thank you.
Sure. I'll try to deal with them in the order that they were in the old report, because that'll make it a little easier for me to go through and make sure I'm not missing anything. So we expected that there would be some short-term and long-term goals. This was when we did the audit that would link. Regional Council at that point in time had a priority outcome of a well-maintained transportation network. And we expected to see the business unit defining that and having some goals that were linked to it. However, we found there weren't any formal long-term goals and objectives. And so that recommendation is still outstanding. So that one still requires some work. I know you asked about the value for money, and I believe the performance measures. Just let me jot those down so I don't forget either one of those. So the value for money area, there's an effort made to spread projects around for a variety of reasons. And we had a concern that while there might be lots of high priority projects, some might be higher than others. And so there could be instances where perhaps if a district had a lot of projects in a particular year, there might be a decision taken to not do another project and to do something in another district that may be a high priority, but may not be the highest priority. And so Our concern there was just that, you know, those very highest priority ones is the best way to maximize your value for money. In terms of the performance measures, let me just grab that recommendation. Bear with me for a moment. So in that particular area, we found a lack of performance targets. So there were some targets at one point in time, but actual results were never compared to the targets. And then at some point, those targets weren't reported anymore. So we expected to see, you know, performance measures identified with established targets and then progress towards those or achievement of those measured on a yearly basis. We would expect some of that to be reported publicly. And then the division themselves or the business unit themselves might have some more targets internally that they use for their own management purposes. So that recommendation is also one that is still outstanding.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mayor Savage.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Evangeline. David's not on the call with us, is he?
No, but I have already gotten a Teams message from him that he's a little cranky with me for having mentioned his retirement.
Sounds a bit like him. Anyway, listen, congratulations to him. So he's put a lot of time in, and
Indeed.
he deserves a bit of a break. So good luck in trying to replace him. I'm sure you'll find somebody, but he's quite a good guy. I wish him very well. Evangeline, just to follow up a little bit on the TPW recommendation. So all of these recommendations, when they came forward, were accepted by management.
Yes. And
just to what extent do you follow up with the department as opposed to with this committee?
So I'll outline the process for follow-up in general. What we do is we take all of the previous recommendations when we're ready to start follow-up, and we send them, we ask for key contacts from the executive directors of the business units. Then we reach out to those contacts, give them the recommendations, and ask them to do a management self-assessment of which recommendations are complete versus not. And then we look at the ones that they have assessed as complete. We don't really do a whole lot with the ones they've assessed as incomplete, other than read to make sure that there hasn't been a misunderstanding. I have had the occasional time where we may say update a policy manual and somebody has, but because policies get updated on an ongoing basis, they don't assess their rec as complete. So we will check for things like that where there might be a little inconsistency, but generally speaking, we would take the ones that the business unit management have assessed as complete, and they would provide some details around why they feel it's complete. They might even provide some backup information. We would look at what they've provided, and we would decide on what we think we need to do to get a review level of assurance, which is less than an audit. So generally, we might look at, for example, a couple of examples of how, let's say, if it was a policy needed to be put in place and appropriate approvals, we might ask for some evidence of a couple of approvals. So we do follow up in detail with the business unit to get their input on this. It really starts with their self-assessment.
Right. And so when we see an X on a recommendation of status, that's something that the business unit and you have agreed on? Maybe.
Sometimes people assess recommendations as complete that are not. You know, I've been auditing for a long time, and I think that's sometimes that's human nature. I'm not sure I've ever done a follow-up assignment in my career where somebody hasn't said they thought a rec was complete that really wasn't. Sometimes it's about understanding the recommendation. Sometimes it's about the fact that, you know, staff or a business unit management may have done a lot of work in a particular area, but there may still be additional steps that need to be taken in order to get to complete.
Sure.
So, yeah, so sometimes we do inform them of what we, you know, the status, and usually try to have a chat with them about that.
Right. So TPW is pretty dynamic and fast moving. They've got lots of things on the go. They've always got their plans, and then there's always stuff that just pops up that they have to deal with as well. I'm just wondering, when you have recommendations like Recs 2, 3, and 4, for example, do you sit down and then talk about, and that's on page 8, is that something that you'll sit down and say, look, determine a timeline, and that you would agree on a timeline by which these would be done? Or would there actually be pushback saying, we don't think that these, even though we've accepted the recs, that things have changed and we don't think that they need to be done.
Sure. Some of this I really think is a learning process on everybody's parts, including perhaps the business units when they prepare responses. And that's not a comment on TPW's response. That's sort of a general comment. Sort of the ideal process for audit recommendations is for a committee such as Audit and Finance to ask for an implementation plan from the auditee, so whoever was audited, in this case, a business unit, on what they intend to do in terms of implementing the recommendations. And then that provides really good information for follow-up for an auditor later. In the instance of recommendations 2, 3, and 4, there was actually a little bit of information that TPW chose to include in its responses to those recs when the original audit was published. And all 3 of those just happened to be ones where they did say they thought they would be done by 2020-21. My understanding from talking to TPW management is that both some staffing challenges and the impact of COVID have delayed implementation. Some recs business units do not put in an implementation date, and that's fair game in my opinion. They may not have figured out how long it will take to implement at the point in time when we're releasing a report. And that's why it's a good idea if Audit and Finance loops back later and says, maybe a month later or 2 months later, give us your implementation plan.
Okay. Yeah, I think my time is done. I may come back, but I appreciate your efforts. And I also appreciate how busy some of the business units are in trying to get these things accomplished. And I know that you're amenable to sitting down and figuring these things out with the business units and the directors. Thank you very much, Evangeline. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Coleman-Sad. So I agree with your follow-up, and I hope, TPW especially comes back and looks at a number of these. But I think there's 2 in particular I want to draw attention to that I think are more complex. And in fact, when you look at the condition of our streets and our transportation network, I think council shares I don't know if it's a larger amount of responsibility than staff do in that respect, because we track that condition index of our roads, and it is entirely correlated to how much money we spend on fixing roads. And so the more money we spend, the higher that condition index is going to be, the better shape our roads are going to be in. And the 4.5 years that I've been on council, we've increased the money we spend to the point where, we've never been able to get all the projects out the door in any particular year, but we're shoveling literally close to $30 million a year now out on repaving roads. And that condition index is actually declining, not increasing. And so I think there's climate change factors, council's responsibility when it comes to actually spending money, also the capacity of the local environment for actually having enough contractors to do the road work that we need. And I'm not sure if those were parts of your discussions with staff. The other issue is around, you mentioning we need to distribute projects around based on the highest priorities. And there are pros and cons, I think, for sure, in that. Obviously, the political ones around, each district is going to have a councillor that is, we need to get X done in my district. But more importantly, and I was a councillor who suffered a few years ago from having an inordinate number of projects, large projects in District 9. So within a 2-year period, I had the closure of the St. Margaret's Bay Road, the CN Bridge on Quinpool Road. Halifax Water was doing work on Quinpool Road. We were repaving parts of Quinpool Road. And the Quinpool Road Business Association was constantly at me for we should not do as much road work because it's keeping people from coming to the business district to shop. And so if you have too much construction happening in the roadway in any one area, it could actually have negative consequences for residents in terms of inconvenience. For businesses, it could be inconvenient, but also a loss of business. And it has other impacts too. On the Transportation Standing Committee, we get quarterly KPI reports from transit, for example. And so, in addition to coordinating projects with the utilities like Nova Scotia Power, Heritage Gas, Halifax Water, it's important also to look at the overall network and how people are coming and going, because, we had issues of buses being late more proportionately in areas with higher amounts of construction than areas with less construction. Intuitively, you would already know that, but it's a very complex process. So on those two particular issues, do you recall your discussions with staff about how they would implement those? If any of those parts of the discussions came up?
So those are both recommendations that were assessed as by management as incomplete. So we wouldn't have done a tremendous amount of work with them during this particular follow-up. However, I do have some recollection from when we did the work to start with that I can share with you. I mean, there's no doubt that, you know, funding can be a challenge. There's a never-ending list of road projects and sidewalk projects. And really that recommendation is about, you know, figuring out what is an acceptable condition, right? There's the Cadillac, there's the Chevette, and there's something in between, and something in between, I'm sure, is probably where, you know, most municipalities want to be, because it's not realistic to have the Cadillac and nobody wants to drive around and walk around on the Chevette sidewalks, if you will. So that one really has to do with figuring out what those goals are, and then, yes, grappling with that difficult issue of how do you deal with that, you know, and that's not an easy one. Completing every single project is not necessarily what would be necessary to complete that recommendation. It has to do more with, okay, what's the condition index that we want roads and sidewalks to be in? And then if we're not there, what's a plan to try to get there, right? What are we going to do maybe differently? And there could be all kinds of things that impact that. So it's about having some detailed plans and some deadlines for when to get there. So that's that one. The value for money one is a challenging one, I know. And I appreciate, you know, the staff in the business unit certainly talked about all those sorts of challenges. To do with, you know, too many projects can cause issues in a particular area and so on. And what we were really looking for was sort of a detailed documentation of when you pick your projects, why are you picking them? Because in the audit, there were some some projects that didn't make their way to the list that year because in particular on the street recapitalization program, because the districts have met their allocated funding levels. And so for us, we were looking for some documented support for why those funding, you know, all of the projects were chosen and so on. And we didn't see the value for money arguments maybe necessarily there as much as we would have liked to. But we do appreciate that, yes, those are challenging areas. And there are many more things that come into play. That can affect decisions on whether or not to do projects, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, you're muted, Paul.
I was. Thank you very much, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation and congratulations to Dave. Never met you, but I'm starting to get jealous about people who are retiring. Just saying. The mayor actually asked some of my questions, which were around those that are incomplete and what is the next step for those that are incomplete. And I understand that, you know, TPW is a much more complex conversation around what's incomplete and why. On the earlier one around the payroll management, where the decision was made to pause using something, the electronic system. So is that something that is as simple as saying restart it, or it's the recommendation of this report to restart those kinds of things? Like, I guess I'm just wondering what's the next step on the incomplete, if it is something that, and does that direction, is it just a recommendation that's accepted from the audit, or does that go to the business unit and the business unit then makes that a priority?
So when we initially make our recommendations, management would tell us whether they agree with them or not, and if they intend to implement them or not. And on the case of the payroll management audit, they agreed with them all. They intended to implement them all. And this particular rec actually arose out of a process that payroll management had told us that they had started already at the time of the audit. And they just needed some better documentation around it. However, unfortunately, when COVID-19 started, they stopped doing that particular control.
Right.
I don't think it would be a very difficult control to restart. I mean, payroll management would have to speak to it for sure, but my understanding is they're PDF forms that are emailed anyway. And so I don't really understand how sort of COVID had an impact on that. It may be a case more of, how people are doing things is changing and there's a lot going on. And it may be more sort of that impact as opposed to it was paper that somebody couldn't look at because maybe they were working from home and that created the challenges. So I don't think it would be hard to restart. I think the takeaway from that one, I don't make recommendations out of follow-up reports, generally speaking.
Okay.
For me, the takeaway from that one really is that controls are always important. If it's an important control, you need to keep doing it. And if it was okay to stop for 6 or 10 months, you need to ask yourself, is that an important control? And if it is, then you need to find either a way to keep doing it or something to mitigate the risk that you were attempting to mitigate with that control.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Morse, for the second time.
Thank you. I just wonder if we could go back to sidewalks. If there was more rationale and priorities made clear, what would the rationale look like? For example, would we have traffic or pedestrian volume studies done for sidewalks and we prioritize the sidewalks with more pedestrian volume? Would we tie it in with the AT plan to make sure that we had sidewalks on the bus rapid transit routes, for example? Like what sorts of rationale or criteria would you like to see in relation to how sidewalks would get prioritized for construction?
So the issue in this area had to do with mostly road capital projects.
Okay.
And our understanding from the audit was that as part of the annual capital program, funding got allocated across HRM districts. And so when funding is being allocated across districts, and you've automatically got to wonder if value for money is truly being achieved, understanding all of the other factors that have been mentioned. And so we brought that forward and said it may not support the goal of a well-maintained transportation network, firstly, because you'd think you'd be looking for your biggest bang for your buck in that, and that it might not represent value for money. So at that point in time, management talked about all of the various factors. They also talked about some new pavement management software that would provide a capability in terms of running what they refer to as what if scenarios in their response. So they felt that once that system became fully operational, staff might be in a better position to advise on value for money based on all of these criteria, some of which some of the councillors have mentioned here today. And so that recommendation has not been completed. And so I would assume that's because, maybe that system is operational, but it's not fully there yet. TPW management may be able to speak better to that if you need additional info on it.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Morse. I don't see anybody else in the chat. So at this point, I would like to thank Evangeline Coleman-Sad for your follow-up report, and it is good information, and we will certainly be looking forward to the next report.
Thank you very much.
The next item on the agenda is 12.2.1, the Neptune Theatre funding request. Jamie MacLellan, are you with us?
I am indeed. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir. And Mayor Savage, would you like to put the motion on the floor?
Sure thing. It is recommended that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council authorize the CAO to execute a contribution agreement with Neptune Theatre for a contribution of up to $100,000, subject to Neptune Theatre providing certain informational requirements as set forth in this report.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Mayor?
Councillor Cleary seconded it. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay, so is there a presentation? I got a copy of a presentation here. Is that something that's being presented by Jamie or by Neptune, or I'm not quite sure what the process is?
I think the presentation you would have received is the one that the Neptune presented at the Audit and Finance Standing Committee some months ago.
Okay, all right, you're right. Okay, so yeah, so I'm pleased to put this forward. Look, we have a number of wonderful theaters across HRM. We have them in the heart of the downtown. We have them in Dartmouth and Bedford and Musquodoboit Valley. We have them in the Eastern Shore. We have them in Hubbards. We have amazing theater across HRM, and I think all of them are worthy of support for the work that they do. I think among those who have been most severely hurt, we know the bars and the restaurants, the hotels, the airport sometimes forget how badly banged up the cultural industries have been by COVID and the lack of opportunity to perform. It's been it's had a real negative impact on our municipality and the vibrancy that our city exhibits usually. I know that people came here last year when the bubble was in play, and they came downtown Halifax, and then they left early because there just wasn't enough things to do. There wasn't plays to go to. There wasn't performances, and you know, we have to think about the performers, the actors, the singers, as well as everybody else who does things in the public realm. Neptune has tried to keep that going. Neptune has done, in my view, yeoman service in trying to be supporting all the cultural industries across HRM. They're a little different. They have a facility, a big facility right in the heart of Halifax. And as they've told us before, you know, it may not be sustainable. They may have to look at making dramatic changes. But in the meantime, from an operating point of view, they're up against it. You've seen in the report that they have a deficit, is it of $900,000, an annual deficit of $950,000, an accumulated deficit of $2 million. You know, when I talk to folks who are looking to come to Halifax or do come to Halifax to set up either businesses or themselves in business, having a professional theater, having a professional symphony is really important, and it supports all the other theaters that are so important across our municipality. Neptune is unique in that they have a facility. Look, we're going to support the bus stop theater, which is important, and I think we should support all theater groups to the extent that we can, and I know that we have cultural spaces work that's going on. But for me, Neptune is a little bit unique. Halifax would not be Halifax without Neptune Theatre. And I think that the efforts that they're making to try to do performances and to try to support the other cultural industries is really commendable. And I am absolutely in full support of this motion. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. And if any other members of council would like to speak to this, please indicate that in the chat. At this point, I have not seen any. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And a fan of Neptune, absolutely, in all theater. In the report, it says Neptune Theatre is classified as an anchor organization. And I was just wondering if you could give me a little bit more context or understanding of that language of an anchor organization, please.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, through the councillor, the anchor organizations in our professional arts grants program are characterized simply by the fact that their annual operating budget is over $3 million per year. We only have two anchor organizations under that program, so that would be Symphony Nova Scotia and Neptune Theatre. And I guess by virtue of that, they qualify for a larger grant than the non-anchor arts organizations in our program.
And just as a follow-up, has Symphony Nova Scotia, the other anchor organization, have they made any approaches to HRM?
To share through to the councillor, my understanding is that they have not. They're slightly different, as the mayor had stated in his remarks, in that they aren't a bricks and mortar organization. Certainly, I would suspect that they would have challenges during this period as well, but perhaps not at the same level as Neptune.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Following up from that, with the art gallery, be similar or as an anchor organization, or would they be a completely different entity?
Mr. Chair, the art gallery actually doesn't apply through our program. They are a provincial, as you know, provincial funded organization, and under their kind of auspices, they don't make application to our program. They certainly would be considered that based on their operating budget were they to make application.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions in the chat. So all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That motion.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yes, thank you, Jamie. And we are on to 12.2.2, budget changes for the composting facilities recapitalization. Would somebody please put that motion on the floor?
Mr. Chair, I could certainly do that.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary.
I move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, approve a budget increase to the 2021-22 approved gross capital budget to increase project account number CW 190005 Burnside Composting Facility repairs in the amount of $539,000, and 2, approve an unbudgeted reserve withdrawal of $539,000 from Q556 Solid Waste Facilities Reserve to fund this increase as outlined in the financial implications section of this report.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Are there any questions on this? Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if someone could make it a little clearer for the time period that that this investment will support in terms of how much longer it will be operating. I wasn't entirely sure. I thought it would be until 2023, but someone could just clarify that, please.
Thank you. And I see Andrew Philopoulos. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Philopoulos, Director of Solid Waste Resources, through you to the councillor. So the 2 existing composting facilities will be operated until we commission the new composting facility planned for the fall of 2023. So yes, these capital upgrades that we are completing are all about keeping the facility viable until that time.
So
So that's
yeah, so it's essentially 2 more years. The $500,000 or more is needed to keep them viable for the next 2 years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to get clarification in regards to the nature of the recapitalization. To me, it sounds like we're having another corrosion issue in regards to humidity and moisture. And is that we're having, like we had the same experience over at Otter Lake with the roof and stuff. You know, I hear building structural beams and stuff like that. I'm just kind of, is that because we're having corrosion issues, or is there some default in the structure itself that needs to be re-supported or re-engineered? And also, I thought that have we assumed these facilities now from Miller and stuff who previously operated them? Because I thought they were in the process of decommissioning, but I thought we were trying to have a carryover to our new facilities already. So I just want to have clarification on the ownership of the assets.
Thank you, through the chair to the councillor. So all of our facilities that deal with organics have corrosion challenges. So there's nothing new here that has evolved in terms of the types of challenges that we need to overcome. This is just simply about the timing of the new contract, which was executed in February of 2021. And as part of executing that agreement, we needed to complete an independent assessment of the facility. So we always had a capital plan for both of these facilities. It slightly changed as a result of that independent assessment. And as a result of the timing of it is why we're here before with this recommendation for additional funds. Your second question, councillor, with regards to the ownership, correct, come April 1st, the Miller composting facility is ours. We own it now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions on this issue. So with that, I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you very much. That motion passes. The next item, we are just about done. The next item on the agenda is 12.3 Grants Committee, and there is nothing from there. Committee members, there is nothing. Motions is nothing. There is nothing in camera. There are no added items. Notices of motion. I don't see any notices of motion. Public participation is the next item on the agenda, and there were no registered speakers for public participation by 4:30 p.m. on yesterday, June 15th, which was the deadline to sign up for that. So the date of the next meeting is July 21st, 2021. And we are at the final item on the agenda. So could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. We stand adjourned.